This deck features a Simic commander you've never even heard of. It contains over 400 unique combo lines and the whole thing will only cost you about €100. Lonis, Genetics Expert. Lonis is one of those unique commanders that most people have never even seen. And honestly, that totally blows my mind. Because this card is absolutely broken. For just 3 mana in Simic colors, Lonis gives us one of the most absurd synergy engines ever printed. Blending +1/+1 counters, clue tokens, and combo potential all into one little neat Snake Elf Detective package. Let's start with the basics. Lonis has the Evolve mechanic, meaning whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control with either greater power or greater toughness than Lonis, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on him. And this little ability synergizes perfectly with his second ability. Whenever any number of +1/+1 counters are put on Lonis, we get to investigate that many times, meaning that every counter you put onto Lonis will also give you a clue token. Clues, of course, being simple artifact tokens you can sacrifice for 2 mana to draw a card. And that ability alone already turns every Evolve trigger and any other effect that puts counters onto Lonis into pure card advantage. But Lonis doesn't stop there. His third ability says that whenever we sacrifice a clue token, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature we control. Which means the clue tokens won't just be drawing us cards. They feed back into our board, allowing us to scale up our other creatures and trigger any other counter synergies we play in the deck. So at face value, Lonis looks like a really fun clue token value commander. But the moment you look at these two abilities combined, you can quickly figure out that you can do some absolutely broken stuff with this commander. Every part of his design feeds right back into the other. Counters will make clues and clues will make counters. And once you add in a single sacrifice outlet or a counter engine, you can easily enable some infinite loops. And yes, this entire Lonis deck is built around this insane combo potential. Because once Lonis is on the battlefield, you just have to sneeze in his direction and he goes infinite. We're talking infinite card draw, infinite clue tokens, infinite mana, infinite damage, infinite turns, whatever. And the crazy part is that you can build this entire list on about a €100 budget. That's right, this deck has more than 400 unique possible combo lines, a very unique 3 mana commander that no one even knows, and the entire deck will cost you less than most mana bases. And I'm gonna be honest, this isn't the easiest deck to pilot. You really have to know your combo pieces, your sequencing, and exactly which combos you can assemble with the cards in your hand. But once you get the hang of it, this deck plays like a machine. That's why later in the video I decided to add a dedicated combo section where I will be explaining the main loops in this deck and how they work. And if you want a written reference to study all the combo lines at your own pace, for the first time ever I have written an in-depth primer on Moxfield explaining exactly how all the combos work. And trust me when I say, the primer is an absolute masterpiece. And of course, if you want to take this deck to the next level, I also included an upgrade section where I will be going over some cards if you don't care about the budget and you want to make this deck even more consistent. As I do in all my videos, I will be going over every single card in the deck and explaining why I decided to include it. And for this deck, I will be doing something special. Because it contains over 400 unique combo lines, I will be showing this little icon on screen whenever I go over a card that's used in one of our combos. So keep an eye out for that icon as we go through the deck list. That way, by the time we get to the combo section later in the video, you will already have a really good idea of how all the pieces fit together. And this video is divided up into 8 categories: the Counter Synergies, the Clue Token Synergies, Acceleration, Tutors and Support, Protection and Interaction, the Lands, the most important part, the Combo section, and in the end, a small little upgrade section. Let's get started by going over all the Counter Synergies we play in this deck. Since Lonis constantly grows himself and our other creatures through +1/+1 counters, these are the cards that amplify and reward us for that growth. Ways to put extra counters on creatures, cards that double our counter production, and cards that allow us to convert our +1/+1 counters into an actual game win. Benthic Biomancer, a simple 1 mana creature with the Adapt 1 mechanic, meaning that whenever this creature doesn't already have a +1/+1 counter on itself, we can pay 2 mana to put 1 on him, which is a perfect way to trigger its passive ability. Whenever 1 or more counters are put onto this creature, we get to draw a card and then discard a card. And as you will see later in this video, we do have a ton of ways to put +1/+1 counters on creatures we control, but the easiest way is of course sacrificing clues with Lonis on the field. This sort of looting ability allows us to dig really deep into our deck and just draw into the cards we need to set up any of our infinite loops. Pretty solid for just a 1-drop creature. Hardened Scales, a classic 1-mana enchantment that will allow us whenever we put any number of counters on a creature, we get that many counters +1. And as you can already imagine, this card just synergizes perfectly with both of Lonis' abilities. Whenever you would normally put 1 counter onto Lonis with any of the cards in this deck, or thanks to his evolve ability, you will now get to put 2 counters on him instead, which will also now generate you 2 clue tokens instead of just the single one. And whenever you sacrifice a clue token, Lonis' last ability now allows you to put 2 counters on any other creature, just doubling up on the value that Lonis already gives us. And we do play a ton more cards in the deck like Hardened Scales that allow us to double up on our counter production, and this is used in some of our loops we create in the deck. Tarian's Soul Cleaver, a 1-mana equipment you can equip for 2 mana. And whenever an artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, the equipped creature will get a +1/+1 counter. And this is just the perfect equipment for Lonis, because now whenever you sacrifice a clue token, it actually does go to your graveyard and it will trigger the Soul Cleaver, allowing you to put a +1/+1 counter on Lonis, and you will get to create a new clue token. If you have an effect that allows you to keep paying the mana cost for sacrificing clue tokens or any other sacrifice outlet, Tarian's Soul Cleaver will basically ensure that you can just keep generating clue tokens. As you will see later in the combo section of this video, this is one of the strongest cards in the entire deck. Wizard's Class, a simple 1-mana enchantment that for as long as it is on the battlefield will make you have no maximum hand size. A pretty nice little passive effect that might come in handy because you will be drawing a gazillion cards in this deck. Whenever you invest 3 extra mana into this enchantment, you can make it go to level 2, which will instantly draw you 2 cards. Pretty nice little effect, but the main reason this card is included in the deck is whenever you get it to its last level, which whenever you draw a card will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So either at the beginning of your draw step, any other card draw effects, or whenever you sacrifice a clue token will allow you to put a new +1/+1 counter onto Lonis, making him generate you a new clue token. And like I mentioned with the previous card, for as long as you have the mana to keep sacrificing clue tokens, you will just keep getting new ones thanks to this enchantment. Basking Brutescale, a 2-mana Eldrazi lizard with the Adept 1 mechanic. And like all creatures with the Adept mechanic, this creature has an ability whenever you put a +1/+1 counter on it. Whenever you do, you get to create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn token with the ability that you can sacrifice it to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. And this ability does serve a couple of purposes. You can just create a small army of 0/1 Eldrazi tokens to actually use as chum blockers, or you can decide to sacrifice these tokens and generate you an insane amount of colorless mana. And thanks to Lonis' last ability, we will have a really easy time putting counters onto this creature and generating us a billion Eldrazi spawn tokens. Ozolith, the Shattered Spire, a 2-mana legendary artifact that has exactly the same effect as Hardened Scales, essentially allowing us to double up on our +1/+1 counter production. On top of that, it also has an activated ability that we can tap this artifact for 2 mana to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature we control, which thanks to this card's passive ability will actually put 2 +1/+1 counters on that creature. And this ability can come in really handy when you don't have any other place to make. Just tap this card, put 2 counters onto Lonis, and you will get 2 clue tokens of it, which you can then sacrifice to draw some new cards and just keep your hand fueled. And this card also has the Cycling 2 mechanic, meaning whenever this card is in your hand, you can pay 2 generic mana to discard this card and draw a new card. So if for some reason you have this card in your hand and you really need to draw into some interaction options or some combo pieces, you can just cycle it away, draw a new card, and dig a little deeper into your deck. Sage of Hours. This 2-mana wizard probably has one of the craziest payoffs for any +1/+1 counter based strategies. On instant speed, we can remove all +1/+1 counters from this creature, and then we get to take an extra turn after this one for each 5 counters we removed. And even without using him in any of our combos, this effect is just absolutely ridiculous. Because if you do have some cards on the battlefield that allow you to double up on your counter production, and whenever you start sacrificing clue tokens with Lonis on the field, it will be really easy to get a ton of counters on this dude. You can then just take an extra turn, get even more counters on him, and in the next turn you can just produce some extra counters on this creature, activate his ability again, and you will get even more turns. You'd actually be surprised how easy it is with this creature and Lonis to just start chaining infinite turns without even you being able to generate infinite counters or infinite clue tokens. Simic Ascendancy. For 2 mana you get an enchantment with an activated ability for 3 mana that allows you to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control. A perfect way to trigger Lonis or any of the other value counter engines we play in this deck. And whenever any number of +1/+1 counters are put on a creature we control, we also get to put that many growth counters onto this enchantment. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if this enchantment has 20 or more growth counters on itself, you will just instantly win the game. This card is a really easy to trigger alternate win con, because in this deck we will easily be able to generate infinite counters on our creatures, and then whenever you have this on the battlefield, it just has to stick around for a turn cycle, and by the time it's your turn, you will just instantly win the game. Evolution Witness. This card is basically the +1/+1 counter version of an Eternal Witness. Whenever we put any number of counters on this creature, we get to return target permanent card from our graveyard to our hand. Now, while we're not using this card in any of our combos, it is the perfect recursion piece for this deck, because if some of your key permanent cards actually do end up in your graveyard due to being milled, discarded, removed, or whatever, this is the only way in the deck we actually have to recur those pieces. And whenever you have Lonis on the battlefield, you can just sacrifice a clue token, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and then easily return any of those cards to your hand. Yeah, Lonis and this creature essentially allow you to just keep recurring any value pieces you have, and eventually your opponents will run out of removal. Kami of Whispered Hopes. A 3-mana creature that has the same effect as a Hardened Scales attached as a passive effect on itself, giving us an additional counter whenever we would put counters onto something. Honestly, that ability in itself would already be enough to include this creature in the deck, but it also has an activated ability, which arguably is even better than the passive effect. We can tap this creature to add X mana of any color to our mana pool, X being Kami of Whispered Hope's power. And as you can imagine, this ability just scales out of control like crazy whenever you are able to put some +1/+1 counters on this creature. Whenever you sacrifice a clue token with Lonis onto the field, you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on this card. Thanks to the passive ability, you will get 2 counters instead, and Kami will already be at 3 power, allowing you to tap it for 3 mana. And that's just giving you an example if you are able to put a single +1/+1 counter on this creature. In most games, it really isn't all that hard to put like 10 or 20 counters onto this creature and make it generate you an insane amount of mana, which you can then use to crack more clue tokens, get more counters onto this creature, and get even more mana. Master Seymour. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you get to put X +1/+1 counters on another target creature you control. X being Master Seymour's power. Just a really solid creature body that will generate you value every single turn. And because this creature triggers at the beginning of combat, you can just drop him in your first main phase and he will generate you immediate value the turn he comes down. Whenever you are able to stack some +1/+1 counters on Master Seymour himself, increasing his power, he will give you an insane amount of counters to put onto any other creature and trigger any of the synergies, like generating a huge amount of clue tokens with Lonis, or generating you a ton of Eldrazi spawn with a Basking Brood scale. And talking about putting counters on Master Seymour, he also has the Monstrosity ability for 5 mana. Whenever you activate this ability, you get to put X +1/+1 counters onto Master Seymour equal to the amount of counters amongst creatures you control, which in this deck will always be a huge amount. Scurry Oak. This card essentially functions in the same way as a Basking Brood scale. Whenever you put counters onto this creature, you also get to generate a 1/1 squirrel token. Now, while the 1/1 squirrel tokens aren't as good as the 0/1 Eldrazi spawn tokens that you can sacrifice for mana, they will still function as some really solid chump blockers for any creatures that might be swinging at you. And whenever you are are able to set up a loop to get infinite +1/+1 counters, your army of infinite squirrels will be able to just close out the game for you. And just like Lonis, this card also has the evolve ability, meaning you do have a way to start generating 1/1 squirrel tokens by just playing bigger creatures. Terra Symbiosis, a 3 mana enchantment we got in the Edge of Eternity set. Whenever we would put any number of +1/+1 counters on a creature, we get to draw that many cards. This ability only triggers once per turn. Just combining this card with Lonis will already draw you an insane amount of cards, because whenever Lonis evolves or whenever you sacrifice a clue token, this will already draw you an additional card. And since you are able to sacrifice clue tokens on instant speed, it actually is really easy to sort of bypass the once per turn mechanic. You can sacrifice a clue token during your own turn, draw a card, go to an opponent's turn, sacrifice a clue token in an opponent's turn. During their turn, you will also get to draw a card of this enchantment, and you will essentially be able to draw 4 cards per turn cycle. And this card goes absolutely nuts whenever you combine it with a card like Hardened Scales, because now you will get 2 counters instead of the 1, and Terra Symbiosis will draw you 2 cards every single counter you put on something. Vigian Graft Mage, a 3 mana creature with the Graft 2 mechanic. This creature will enter the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on itself, and whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you are allowed to move 1 +1/+1 counter from this creature to the other creature. A perfect creature to play before you actually play your Lonis, because whenever Lonis then enters the battlefield, you can instantly move a counter to him and you will get a free clue token. But the main reason this card is included in the deck is his activated ability. For 2 mana, we get to untap any creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. This ability enables a huge amount of combos in this deck that will allow us to produce infinite mana. Because if you do control a creature that produces at least 3 mana whenever you tap it, you can just use 2 of that mana to activate this creature's ability, untap the mana producer, tap it again, and you will always net 1 mana in the process, generating you infinite mana. I will be going more in depth in this interaction in the combo section. Phantom Mage, a 4 mana 1/1 creature that will draw you a card whenever you put a +1/+1 counter on it. As you can imagine, this sort of ability will generate you an insane amount of card draw in this deck. Whenever we sacrifice a clue token, Lonis' last ability will allow us to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature. If we do put it onto Phantom Mage, we will get to draw an additional card. And we do play a ton more effects in this deck that allow us to put counters on creatures. Combine any of those effects with Hardened Scales and you will be able to draw an absurd amount of cards of this creature. And it also has the evolve mechanic, making it really easy to just play any creature, evolve this creature, and get to draw additional cards. Loading Zone. For 4 mana, we get an enchantment that will double up any number of counters we would put on any creature we control. And unlike the previous effects like Hardened Scales or the Ozolith, this card will actually double the amount of counters, not just give us an additional one. Now I'm gonna be honest, paying 4 mana for this type of effect is kinda mid. And that's why this card also has the warp mechanic, meaning instead of paying the usual 4 mana to play this card, you can actually cast it for 1 green mana. The downside being that it will be exiled at the end of the turn. But thanks to how the warp mechanic works, you will still be able to cast it from exile on a later turn for its regular mana cost. In all the games I played with this deck, I have never ever cast it for the 4 mana. Usually you can just warp it in for the 1, generate an absurd amount of value, or enable one of your infinite loops in the deck, and then honestly its job will be done, because it will have either won you the game or generated you an absurd amount of value. By far one of the most efficient cards in the entire deck to just start off your turn with. Lila, Holographic Assistant. This creature has exactly the same ability as the last part of Wizard's class. But instead of having to play the class first and invest a huge amount of mana into it to get to that point, this time you get the effect on a really simple 4-drop body. Whenever you draw a card, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Sacrificing a clue token will now allow you to put another counter onto Lonis and get a new clue token. At the beginning of your draw step, this card will also trigger and allow you to put a counter on Lonis, generating you an extra clue token. And if you combine this with a card like Terra Symbiosis, you will be drawing a huge amount of cards and you will be able to put a ton of counters on any of your creatures. And the last card in this section, and you probably could have seen it coming from a mile away, is Walking Ballista, an artifact creature with a mana cost of double X. And this creature will enter the battlefield with X+1/+1 counters on it. Walking Ballista is one of the strongest cards you can run in any +1/+1 counter based deck. And that is because on instant speed you can remove a counter from this creature and ping 1 damage to any target, essentially turning this card into some sort of a Gatling gun for as long as you do have counters on it that you can just use to remove any of your opponent's creatures or just take your opponents out of the game. As you will see later in the combo section, in this deck we do have a really easy time generating infinite +1/+1 counters, which Walking Ballista will then translate into a game win. And this card also has an activated ability for 4 colorless mana, which will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Like I mentioned, we also play loops in this deck that allow us to produce infinite mana, and whenever you do have a Walking Ballista, you can just put the infinite mana into the ballista, get infinite counters, and just win the game. This card both allows us to translate infinite mana and infinite counters into an instant win. Next up, we have the Clue Token Synergies. These are the cards that help us generate, multiply, or exploit the massive amount of clue tokens we will be generating in this deck. The cards in this section will enable us to turn these clue tokens into additional card draw, mana, or setup for any of our combo lines. And let's start off this section by talking about one of the best creatures that you can include in a Lonis deck. Cryptic Trilobite, another creature with double X in its mana cost, and it will enter the battlefield with X+1/+1 counters on itself. And by removing a counter from this creature, you get to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool, but you can only use that mana for activated abilities. And yes, sacrificing a clue token for 2 mana to draw a card is actually an activated ability. So you can totally use the 2 mana this creature generates to sacrifice clue tokens. And whenever you have Lonis on the battlefield and you sacrifice a clue token, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. So you can actually remove a counter from this card, use a 2 mana to sacrifice a clue token, draw a card, you will get a Lonis trigger, and you will get to put another +1/+1 counter on this creature, which you can then remove again at 2 mana, sacrifice another clue, and you can just keep the loop going. When combined with Lonis, this card will generate you infinite mana to keep sacrificing clue tokens. And whenever you then have a way to put additional +1/+1 counters on Lonis and keep generating clue tokens, this will easily set up some infinite loops. And for 1 generic mana and tapping this creature, it will put a +1/+1 counter on itself. So you can just cast this creature for 2 mana, make it enter with a +1/+1 counter, on a later turn just tap itself, go to 2 counters, and then you can start using its ability. You will always need at least 2 counters on this creature to do any sort of shenanigans with it, because if it only has 1 counter and you remove it, it actually has 0 toughness and it will die to its own effect. Altar of the Brute. Whenever this 1 mana artifact is on the battlefield and another permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent has to put the top card of their library into their graveyard. Whenever you play a creature, a land, create a clue token, a food token, a treasure token, you will be milling your opponents, and sometimes you will just hit some core cards in their deck which they won't be able to get back, and you will totally disrupt their game plan. But the main reason this card is included in the deck is because we will be able to generate an infinite amount of clue tokens. Whenever you then have this simple 1 mana card on the battlefield, each opponent will have to put their entire library into the graveyard, and this will result into a game win. Arcbound Ravager, a 2 mana 0/0 creature with modular 1, meaning this creature will enter the battlefield with 1 +1/+1 counter. Whenever this creature dies, we get to put any number of +1/+1 counters it had on itself onto any other target artifact creature we control. Now, since we don't really play any other artifact creatures in this deck, the modular mechanic isn't really all that relevant. I suppose you can put its counters onto a Walking Ballista and generate some value that way, but that's not the reason why it's included. The reason it is included is because Arcbound Ravager allows us to sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on itself. And we can use this ability on instant speed as many times as we want. If you have been paying attention to Lonis' last ability, it doesn't only trigger whenever you sacrifice a clue to its own effect to draw a card. It just triggers whenever you sacrifice a clue token to any effect, including Arcbound Ravager. Arcbound Ravager is one of the most efficient sacrifice outlets for artifacts that doesn't require any setup. You just have to have it on the battlefield and you can start sacrificing clue tokens on instant speed to easily really get a ton of triggers out of Lonis's last ability. And as you will see later in the combo section, we do run a ton of combo lines that do require us to have a sacrifice outlet. Clan Crafter, a 2 mana legendary enchantment background. And this enchantment will give Lonis an additional ability. For 2 generic mana and sacrificing an artifact, we get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Lonis and draw a card. And this effect essentially allows us to sacrifice our clue tokens for 2 mana like we could usually do, but in addition, Lonis will get a +1/+1 counter whenever we do so, making him generate a new clue token. So for as long as you can keep paying the 2 generic mana, you will be able to just generate new clue tokens, sacrifice him, and draw a new card whenever you do so. And as you can imagine, this sort of card enables a ton of our loops in the deck. Grinding Station. By tapping this card and sacrificing an artifact, we can make target opponent mill 3 cards. And whenever any other artifact enters the battlefield, we get to untap Grinding Station, enabling us to use it again. And like with Altar of the Brute, this card will enable us to just mill out our opponents and instantly win the game. Because let's say you have a way to put +1/+1 counters onto Lonis whenever you sacrifice an artifact like a Therian Soul Cleaver, you can just tap your Grinding Station, sacrifice a clue token, an opponent will have to mill 3 cards, you'll get a +1/+1 counter on Lonis, a new clue token will enter the battlefield, you get to untap Grinding Station, and then you can just keep repeating the loop until your opponents don't have any cards left in their decks. Talking about the ways to get +1/+1 counters onto Lonis whenever you sacrifice an artifact, Piper Rite. This card has essentially the same function as a Therian Soul Cleaver in this deck. Whenever you sacrifice a clue token to whatever effect, you will get to put a +1/+1 counter onto any creature. Usually you will then put the +1/+1 counter onto Lonis, generate a new clue token, and whenever you then have a sacrifice outlet on the battlefield, you will just be able to set up another loop. She also has another ability: whenever she deals combat damage, you will get to investigate and create even more clue tokens. But honestly, that ability isn't all that relevant because it is a 1/2 body and we will barely ever be swinging with creatures in this deck. Sagint Steelseeker. Whenever we have an artifact entering the battlefield under our control, we get to look at the top card of our library. If that card is a land card, we can reveal it and put it straight into our hand. And if it's any other card, we can choose to either put the card back on top or put it into our graveyard. So whenever you create a clue token, you can actually get some card advantage whenever you have a land on top, or you do get to filter the top card of your library, just allowing you to dig really deep into your deck. Just toss the cards you don't need into your graveyard until you hit one of your combo pieces to actually finish the game with. Academy Manufacturer, a classic card you should play in any food, clue, or treasure deck. And that is because whenever you generate one of those 3 types of tokens, you now get to generate all 3 of them instead. So instead of just getting clue tokens of Lonis, you now will be getting treasures and foods in addition to that. Already in itself some really crazy value. Because let's say you are able to generate 5 clue tokens, which is something you will be doing every turn, you will now also get 5 treasure tokens, and you will get access to 5 more mana to use any of the cards in this deck. And in this deck, it isn't all that hard to create an infinite amount of clue tokens. Whenever you have an Academy Manufacturer on the battlefield, you will also get infinite treasure tokens and infinite food tokens, meaning you'll have infinite mana to actually activate your clue tokens and draw your entire deck. And you will also be able to get infinite life by activating all of the food tokens. Donatello the Brains, one of the new cards we will get next year in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set. And this card uses the newest artifact token type, Mutagen tokens, which are simple artifact tokens you can invest 1 mana into, sacrifice them, and you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And the Mutagen tokens are exceptionally good with Lonis, because you can just crack them, put a counter onto Lonis, and you will get a new clue token. And whenever you would create any number of tokens with Donatello on the field, you will get an additional Mutagen token. So essentially, whenever you crack a Mutagen token, put the counter onto Lonis, he will already give you a clue token back and a new Mutagen token, which in itself is already really solid value. And I am really eager to see what other cards we will get that produce Mutagen tokens. Forensic Gadgeteer, a 3 mana creature that will reduce the cost of any activated abilities or artifacts have by 1 generic mana. This creature allows us to sacrifice our clue tokens for 1 mana instead of 2 mana, making our clue tokens way more efficient and allowing us to draw more cards. And whenever we cast an artifact spell like one of our mana rocks or one of our artifact win conditions, we will also get to investigate and create an additional clue token. And obviously, the more clues we can get in this deck, the more value we will be able to generate. Talking about value, Jaheira, Friend of the Forest. This 3-mana creature will give all tokens we control an additional activated ability. And that is that we can tap him to add 1 green mana to our mana pool. And this effect goes absolutely crazy with the clue tokens. Because since the clue tokens aren't creatures, they aren't affected by summoning sickness. So any clue token you generate with Jaheira on the battlefield, you can instantly tap to add a green mana. And whenever you do have a couple of clue tokens or you are able to generate multiple ones, you can just tap the clue tokens for mana, and even though they are tapped, you still are able to sacrifice them to draw a card. And Jaheira works on any sort of token, be it the Eldrazi spawn tokens, the squirrel tokens, and even food tokens, treasure tokens, or mutagen tokens we are able to generate in this deck. Peregrine Took. Whenever any sort of tokens would be generated under our control, we also get to create an additional food token. A really good way to get additional artifact tokens on the battlefield, which you can then abuse with Jaheira to generate even more mana or trigger any of the other artifact synergies we have in the deck. We can also sacrifice 3 food tokens to this creature and we will get to draw a card. The main reason this card is included in the deck is because whenever we are able to generate infinite clue tokens, we will also be able to generate infinite food tokens, which we can then sacrifice to Peregrine Took to draw our entire deck without even spending a single mana for it. Krark Clan Ironworks. Now I'm gonna be totally transparent here. I really can't pronounce the name of this card. Kark. So I'm just gonna be referring to this card as KCI for the remainder of the video. And even though I can't pronounce this card's name, it is one of the best cards in the entire deck. It's a 4-mana artifact that allows us to sacrifice an artifact on instant speed to just add 2 colorless mana to our mana pool. Now, like I already mentioned when I was talking about Arcbound Ravager, we do need some unconditional sacrifice engines for our clue tokens to enable some combos in this deck. And KCI is a sacrifice outlet that even gives us a benefit in the form of 2 colorless mana, which you can use to cast any of your expensive spells, or you can use the 2 mana to just sacrifice any clue tokens you have to just dig really deep into your deck. And the last card in this section, and by far the best card in the entire deck, Extruder. For 4 mana, you get a colorless artifact creature that will allow you to sacrifice any artifact, and then you get to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature. Now, the reason this card is the best card in the entire deck is because this card does set up a 2-card infinite combo when you combine him with Lonis. And almost all of the loops we play in this deck are a variation on the Lonis and Extruder combo. I'll be going more in depth into this combo in the combo section, but let me just give you a quick summary of how it works. Whenever you sacrifice a clue token to Extruder, first up you will get a Lonis trigger because a clue just has been sacrificed, allowing you to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control. And then you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on any creature you control thanks to Extruder's ability. Obviously, you will be putting a counter onto Lonis, which then in turn will generate you a new clue token, which you can sacrifice again to Extruder and just repeat the loop. And this loop will result in infinite counters on any creature you control, infinite counters on Lonis, and infinite clue tokens entering and leaving the battlefield. Now, aside from this combo putting an infinite amount of +1/+1 counters on all your creatures, it won't win you the game. But we do play a total of 16 cards in the deck that will translate this sort of loop into a game win. And I will be going really in depth into these Extruder loop combos in the combos section, so make sure you stay tuned for that. If you're enjoying my in-depth deck tech videos and you want to support me and the channel, check out the YouTube membership program. You'll get early access to the deck lists of these videos before they even release. You'll get access to some exclusive Discord chat rooms where I will be sharing what decks I'm currently working on. And at the highest tier, you can even submit your deck for a personal review by me. And I also want to use this opportunity to thank all of the current YouTube members. Thanks to you, I can keep doing what I love doing most, brewing some awesome decks. If you do want to help me keep the lights on in the studio, buy some coffee, and feed my cat, click the big join button below the video. Next up, we have the acceleration section. With all the value we'll be generating, it is really important to get Lonis and our combo pieces out as soon as possible. This section covers all our mana rocks, ramp pieces, and unique mana dorks that allow us to set up our board before anyone else is ready to react to our combos. First up, we play 4 1-mana cards in this deck that will allow us to accelerate our mana from as early as turn 1, being an Elvish Mystic, a Llanowar Elves, a Fiendhorn Elves, and a Wild Growth. Whenever you do have one of these cards in your opening hand, you will be able to cast Lonis as early as turn 2. And on later turns, they will provide you with additional mana to get any of your combo pieces out one turn earlier. We also play a Sol Ring, which will also enable you to get Lonis out on turn 2, and we will always have a use for the colorless mana it produces, be it either to cast one of your colorless creatures, one of your more expensive cards, or you can just use the mana to sacrifice any of your clue tokens. We also play 2 2-mana mana rocks, being an Arcane Signet and a Talisman. These cards help us accelerate our mana and fix our colors. While I must admit these 2-mana acceleration options aren't as efficient as the 1-mana ones, I do have 1-mana replacements for these cards in the upgrade section. Devoted Druid, a 2-mana mana dork that you can tap to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. And it also has an activated ability that allows you to put a -1/-1 counter on this creature to untap it. Meaning baseline, due to this creature having 2 toughness, you can just play it, and on the next turn it will already produce you 2 mana, which already is some pretty okay value. But if you didn't know yet, +1/+1 counters and -1/-1 counters actually cancel each other out. So let's say this creature has 5 +1/+1 counters on itself, you will be able to tap it for mana, and a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it, use it again for mana, and you will be able to do this a total of 5 times, making this card an infinite mana outlet whenever we are able to generate infinite +1/+1 counters onto this creature. Incubation Druid, a 2-mana creature that you can tap to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. But if this creature has a single +1/+1 counter on itself, it will actually give you 3 mana instead of the usual 1. You can just sacrifice a clue token to Lonis, put a counter on this creature, and it turns into a 2-mana mana dork that will produce you 3 mana. Gyre Sage, a 2-mana creature with the evolve mechanic. You can tap this creature to add 1 green mana to your mana pool for each +1/+1 counter it has on itself. And just like the previous cards, whenever you are able to get like 3, 4, 5 counters on this creature, it will give you an insane amount of mana. And just like Devoted Druid, whenever you get infinite amount of counters on this creature, it will give you infinite green mana, which you can then use to just enable any of your infinite loops and just win the game. Crystalline Crawler. This 4-mana creature has the Converge mechanic, meaning it will enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on itself for each color of mana that was spent to cast on it. And since we are a 2-color deck, this creature will always enter the battlefield with 2 counters on itself, and you can remove 1 counter from this creature to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, which is honestly just insane in this deck, because you can easily get a ton of counters on this creature either thanks to Lonis or any of the other counter generating effects in this deck, and you can just remove the counters to produce mana on instant speed, and it is colored mana. And this card also doesn't care about summoning sickness, because you don't actually have to tap it to use its effect. And if this card does stay on the battlefield, you can just tap it and it will add a +1/+1 counter on itself. Next up, we have the Tutors and Support section. Since we are a combo deck that really relies on getting specific cards on the battlefield at specific times, we do play a ton of tutors to actually go fetch them up. And the support cards in this section are cards that didn't fit into any other category, but they do enable a ton more infinite loops in this deck. Muddle the Mixture, a 2-mana spell you can use to counter any instant or sorcery spell, making it function as a really solid interaction piece. But the reason why this card is in the tutor section is because it has the Transmute mechanic, meaning for 3 mana you can discard this card from your hand to go tutor up any card with the same mana value, being 2 mana, and put it straight into your hand. And since Transmuting is an activated ability, your opponents can't use any counter magic to actually stop this. And you do have a ton of 2 mana targets for this, be it a Basking Brute Scale, an Arcbound Ravager if you need a sacrifice outlet, a Sage of Hours to just chain infinite extra turns, or even one of your protection spells to protect Lonis. And these are just a couple of examples, there are way more options in the deck. Neoform. As an additional cost to this 2 mana spell, we will have to sacrifice a creature. When we do, we get to search our library for a creature card with the same mana cost as the sacrifice creature plus +1, and that creature will enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. A perfect way to sacrifice any of your mana dorks and just upgrade them into one of your combo pieces. And the fact that the creature will enter with a +1/+1 counter on itself will instantly get you some value in most cases. Reshape. For 2 mana plus X and sacrificing an artifact as an additional cost, we get to search our library for any artifact card with mana cost X or less and put it straight onto the battlefield. The additional cost of having to sacrifice an artifact in this deck really isn't that big of a deal because we will always have clue tokens on the battlefield. Now the main target for this type of artifact tutor will always be Extruder because it is the simplest loop you can set up in this deck. But you do have many more targets in this deck like your KCI, your Academy Manufacturer, your Arcbound Ravager, whatever. It fetches up any artifact you need to just win the game. Eldritch Evolution. This card is really similar to Neoform. As an additional cost, you will also have to sacrifice a creature, but this time you get to search your library for any creature with the same mana value +2. Or it can also be any creature with a lesser mana cost. And then you also get to put that creature instantly onto the battlefield. Now, while an Eldritch Evolution does cost you 1 mana more than a Neoform, the fact that you don't have to search for a creature with a specific mana cost, but the mana cost or less makes it way more versatile in my opinion. Fabricate. A simple 3 mana tutor that will allow you to search your library for any artifact and put it straight into your hand. Not as fancy as the previous cards, but it will get the job done and get you the combo pieces you need. Transit Mage. Whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you get to search your library for an artifact card with either mana cost 4 or 5 and put it into your hand. There is only one reason this card is included in the deck, and that is because it does go fetch up your Extruder, which is once again the strongest combo piece in the entire deck. Whir of Invention. For 3 blue mana plus X, you get to search your library for any artifact card with mana value X or less and put it straight onto the battlefield. Now, while at first sight the mana cost on this card might seem really high for its effect, it does have the improvise mechanic, meaning you can tap artifacts when you cast a spell and each artifact you tap will reduce the cost of this card by 1 generic mana. If you have 4 clue tokens on the battlefield, you can just pay 3 blue mana, tap the 4 clue tokens, and this card will go fetch you up your Extruder. Machine God's Effigy, a 4 mana artifact that will enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. And in addition, it will have the ability that you can tap it to add 1 blue mana to your mana pool. Now, Machine God Effigy will always be an artifact and not a creature. It will just get all the abilities of the copied creature. This card is only included in the deck for one single reason, and that is because it is a 2-card infinite mana combo when you combine it with Devoted Druid. I will be explaining this interaction in the combo section. And we also play 3 clone effects in this deck that allow us to bypass the legend rule. A Chameleon Master of Disguise, a Sakashima, and a Spark Double. These cards are included in the deck because they will allow us to make a copy out of Lonis, and we will actually have 2 Lonises on the battlefield at the same time. Whenever you have 2 copies of Lonis on the battlefield, things get absolutely crazy. Because now whenever you sacrifice a clue token, you will get a trigger on both Lonises, and you can use their abilities to put a counter on each other, triggering both their first abilities. Whenever you now sacrifice a clue, you will get 2 new clue tokens, always netting you 1 additional clue in the process. More about cloning Lonis in the combo section. Next up, we have the protection and interaction section. While this deck is really strong and really explosive, once your opponents see what Lonis can do, you will get attention really fast. These cards will allow us to protect Lonis and our other combo pieces, and they will give us ways to disrupt our opponent's game plans. An offer you can't refuse. A 1 mana spell that allows you to counter target non-creature spell, but in return will give the controller of the counter spell 2 treasure tokens. Now, having the ability to just keep 1 island untapped to counter any board wipe or removal spell targeted at Lonis is just a really efficient deal. Giving an opponent 2 measly treasure tokens in return to counter their removal spell and keeping your Lonis on the board to set up a game-winning combo will always be a really good deal. Rapid Hybridization, a 1 mana instant speed spell that will allow you to destroy target creature. In return, the controller of that creature will get to create a 3/3 creature token. Removing any of your opponent's key creatures for just 1 mana will always be a really good deal. And we don't really care about the 3/3 token anyway, since we don't win through swinging with our creatures. Silk Silguard. For 1 green mana plus X, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on X number of target creatures. Then all our modified creatures will get hexproof until the end of turn. Modified creatures being creatures that are either equipped, enchanted, or have +1/+1 counters on them. Now 90% of the time Lonis will already have a counter on himself, allowing you to cast Silguard for just the 1 green mana and give him hexproof, protecting him from any sort of spot removal. But whenever you do have some extra mana left, you can invest more mana into this spell, get some +1/+1 counters on your creatures, and trigger any of the counter synergies we have in this deck. Slip out the back. For 1 mana on instant speed, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and it phases out, meaning it won't exist until your next turn. Whenever you cast this targeting Lonis, you will already get to generate a clue token, and then he just disappears. Even if your opponents are casting board wipes, removal, it doesn't matter. They can't interact with Lonis until your next upkeep. And phasing a creature out won't remove any counters from it. When it phases back in, it will just re-enter the battlefield with exactly the same amount of counters it already had on it. So you won't be losing any value in the process. Arcane Denial. For 2 mana, you get to counter any target spell on the stack. The controller of that spell will get to draw 2 additional cards at the beginning of their next upkeep. And at the beginning of our next upkeep, we also get to draw a card. Now the reason that I prefer an Arcane Denial over a classic counter spell is due to the fact that it only costs you 1 blue mana pip. Counter spell does cost 2 blue mana pips, and it might sometimes be hard to actually get to those 2 colors in this type of deck. Truth of the matter is that this is one of the most efficient counter spells ever printed. Collective Resistance. For 2 mana, you get an instant speed spell with 3 fantastic options. You can destroy target enchantment, target artifact, or you can give target creature hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. So both allows you to interact with your opponent's cards and protect your own creatures, and this card also has the escalate mechanic, meaning whenever you cast it, you get the ability to pay 2 additional green mana, and for each additional mana you paid for it, you get to pick an additional option. If you just really need one of the options, you can just cast it for 2 mana, and if you really want to get all 3 of those options in a single spell cast, you can do so for 4 mana. A really versatile interaction card. Curse of the Swine. For 2 blue mana plus X, we get to exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller will get to create a 2/2 board token. And this is by far my personal favorite mono blue mass interaction spell. You can either cast this for 3 mana, just using it as a single target interaction spell, or you can cast this for 5 mana, just exiling everyone's commander. Gaia's Gift. For 2 mana, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and also give it hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Both a fantastic way to protect Lonis and to generate an extra counter and clue token to get any of your loops started. Over the Edge. A really unique little card that either lets you destroy target artifact or enchantment, or that allows one of your creatures to explore twice. Explore being a mechanic that allows you to reveal the top card of your library. If it is a land card, you get to put it straight into your hand, giving you some sort of pseudo card advantage. And if it is a non-land card, you can either put it back or put it into your graveyard, and you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on the creature. A really cool interaction spell that also allows you to get additional counters and additional clues. Beast Within. This spell allows you to deal with any problematic permanent on the battlefield and give a 3/3 beast token in return to the controller of that permanent. Essentially the same effect as a rapid hybridization, but instead of only dealing with problematic creatures, we can use this on any permanent. We can even use it on problematic lands like a Valakut or a Field of the Dead. And the last card in this section is a Bridgeworks Battle, one of the MDFC cards. For 3 mana, we get to give a creature +2/+2 and it will fight a creature we don't control, functioning as a really efficient removal spell to just spot remove any creatures you don't like on the battlefield. And if you don't need the removal spell, you can just play the backside of this card, which essentially is a basic forest that will even enter the battlefield untapped for the low cost of 3 life. Like I mentioned in all my videos, there really isn't any downside to including any of these MDFC land cards in your decks. Next up, we have the lands. And since this deck is built on a €100 budget, the mana base isn't anything fancy. If the budget isn't a problem for you, you can easily improve the consistency of this deck by including fetch lands, a shock land, just in general some of the more expensive dual colored lands. But honestly, the budget mana base will do its job just fine for this Lonis deck. We're also running a couple of utility lands in the deck, so I'll start by going over those. Animal Sanctuary. For 2 mana and tapping this land, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target bird, cat, dog, goat, ox, and most importantly, snake. Like I mentioned in the intro, Lonis is actually a snake elf detective, and this little land just gives you an additional option to start stacking counters onto Lonis, start generating clue tokens, and get any of your infinite loops started. Archway of Innovation. This land will enter the battlefield untapped if you control an island, and for 1 blue mana and tapping it, the next spell you cast will get the improvise mechanic, meaning whenever you cast that spell, you can tap artifacts to reduce the mana cost by 1 generic mana for each artifact you tapped. A perfect way for when you have a ton of clue tokens on the battlefield to get a huge cost reduction on the next spell you cast. Mistrise Village. Enters the battlefield untapped whenever you control a forest, and for 1 blue mana and tapping this land, the next spell you cast this turn can't be countered. Since I personally do play in a pot where a ton of counter magic is being played, this is just the perfect option to deal with those pesky control players. Seat of the Signet and Tree of Tales. Both of these lands also have the artifact typing, meaning that they do have some really nice synergies with some of the cards in this deck. You can sacrifice them to KCI to generate some colorless mana, you can sacrifice them to your Extruder to get some extra +1/+1 counters, or you can even sacrifice them to your Clancrafter when you don't have any clue tokens available to you. There really isn't any downside to including these two artifact lands in this deck. And for the regular mana producing lands in this deck, we play a Command Tower, an Exotic Orchard, a Flooded Grove, a Hinterland Harbor, an Overflowing Basin, one of the Horizon lands, a Pain land, and for basics we play 12 forests and 10 islands. Now before we get into the section you've all been waiting for, the combo section, there's something I want to share with you first. If you haven't joined the Panzer MTG Discord server yet, you're seriously missing out, because we've recently added a brand new deck archive section. It's a public forum where everyone can post their commander decks, and the decks will stay up there permanently for anyone to browse, to comment on, or to just get inspired by. It's basically turning into this huge shared library of awesome deck lists, all built by our community. So if you want to share your own creations, get feedback on your decks, or just scroll through a ton of cool deck lists, join the Discord by clicking the link in the description below and come add your deck to the Panzer archive. Alright, now it's the time that everyone has been waiting for, the combo section. This deck has a total of more than 400 different combo lines. Every combo you'll see here revolves around Lonis's 2 abilities, creating clue tokens whenever you put +1/+1 counters on him, and putting +1/+1 counters on your creatures whenever you sacrifice those clues. Everything you're about to see here is just a different way to abuse that interaction. So instead of going over every single one of those 400 iterations, I will be explaining the main lines and show you what ways you can actually close out the game with them. And to really understand how this deck and every single combo works, I'd really recommend watching me talk about it in this combo section, then going over to Moxfield, opening up the primer, and just reading through it. I really put a ton of brain power and passion into that primer, and it explains every single thing, and you can just go through it on your own pace. A friend of mine has even printed the primer and just puts it next to him whenever he is playing this Lonis deck. Let's start by going over the simplest combo line in this entire deck. You will just need 2 cards on the battlefield, one being Lonis and the other one being Extruder. You start this combo by sacrificing a clue token to Extruder, and you will then get 2 triggers. The first being a Lonis trigger, since you sacrificed a clue token, which will allow you to put a +1/+1 counter on any other creature you control. Then you will get to put a +1/+1 counter onto Lonis thanks to Extruder's ability. Since you put a +1/+1 counter onto Lonis, he will generate you a new clue token. You can then sacrifice that clue token to Extruder again, and you can just keep looping this as many times as you want. And this really simple 2-card combo will give us the following things: infinite clues entering and leaving the battlefield, an infinite number of +1/+1 counters on Lonis, and an infinite number of +1/+1 counters on any other creature we control. And we can use all 3 of the outcomes of that combo in a ton of payoffs we play in the deck. I'll start by going over the cards that will reward us whenever we have infinite clues entering the battlefield. Having an Altar of the Brood on the battlefield and having an infinite amount of clue tokens entering the battlefield will mill out all your opponents and will instantly win you the game. A Jaheira will allow you to tap every clue token that enters the battlefield before you sacrifice it again, and this will result into you generating infinite green mana. An Academy Manufacturer will also generate you infinite treasure and food tokens. tokens. You can then use the infinite treasure tokens to generate you infinite mana, and you can use the infinite mana to sacrifice your infinite food tokens to gain infinite life. And having a Peregrine Took on the battlefield will also generate you infinite food tokens, which you can then sacrifice to Peregrine Took to draw your entire deck. And since the extruder loop will also allow us to put an infinite amount of counters on any creature who we control, we also play a ton of cards that actually allow us to close out the game with that effect. Having infinite counters on a Sage of Hours will just result into you getting infinite turns and just being able to win the game. Having either a Devoted Druid, a Crystalline Crawler, a Gyre Sage, or a Kami of Whispered Hopes with infinite counters will generate you infinite mana. A Walking Ballista will allow you to deal infinite damage. A Basking Brutescale will generate you infinite 0/1 Eldrazi Science that you can also sacrifice for infinite colorless mana. A Scurry Oak will generate you an infinite amount of 1/1 squirrels. A Phantom Mage will allow you to draw your entire deck. With a Benthic Biomancer you will be able to loot an infinite amount of times. And having a Simic Ascendancy will allow you to win the game on your next upkeep. And one more thing I'd like to mention is that whenever you are able to pull off a line that generates you infinite mana, you will always be able to use your Walking Ballista to just close out the game. So as you can see, once you have the Lonis plus Extruder combo on the battlefield, you do have a ton of ways to turn those infinite counters and infinite clue tokens into actual game wins. Next up, we have another combo that will give us the same results as an Extruder loop. For this combo to happen, you will need 3 cards. You'll need a Lonis on the battlefield. You'll either have to have a Therian Soulcleaver attached to Lonis or a Piper Rite on the battlefield. And you will also need a sacrifice outlet like, for example, an Arcbound Ravager. And you can start this loop by sacrificing a clue token to your Arcbound Ravager. Since a clue token has been sacrificed, either your Soul Cleaver or Piper will put a +1/+1 counter onto Lonis. Lonis will then generate you a new clue token, which you can once again sacrifice to the Arcbound Ravager and just keep the loop going. Lonis will just keep creating you new clue tokens over and over again to sacrifice. This will once again result in infinite clue tokens entering and leaving the battlefield, infinite counters on Lonis, and an infinite number of counters on any creature you control. And all the cards I just went over with the Lonis Extruder loop also apply to this combo line. Instead of using the Arcbound Ravager for this kind of loop, you actually have 3 other sacrifice outlets in the deck you can also use. You can also use a KCI for this effect, which will result in you having infinite colorless mana and infinite draw because you can use the mana to sacrifice all your clue tokens. You can also use a Grinding Station as a sacrifice outlet, which will result into all your opponents milling their entire decks. Or you can use a Cryptolith Trilobite, which will give you mana to sacrifice the clue tokens and actually draw your entire deck. For the next combo line, we will be using some of the clone cards we play in the deck. And for this combo, you will need 3 cards. You will need a Lonis on the battlefield, either a Spark Double, a Chameleon, or a Sakashima as a clone effect, and one of our sacrifice outlets. First up, you will want to play one of your clone cards targeting Lonis, so you will have 2 copies of Lonis on the battlefield. And since all of our clones bypass the legend rule in some way, this will not be a problem. You can then sacrifice a clue token to any of your sacrifice outlets. Both Lonis' abilities will trigger, and you will be able to put a +1/+1 counter on each of your other Lonis. This will then trigger both Lonis' first ability, and it will generate you 2 new clue tokens. And instead of both Lonis' targeting each other, you can also just put 1 counter on one of your Lonis and 1 counter on one of any of your other creatures, which will once again make the loop result in infinite clue tokens entering the battlefield, an infinite amount of counters on Lonis, and an infinite amount of counters on any other creature you control. You can choose any of our sacrifice outlets: an Arcbound Ravager, a Cryptolith Trilobite, a KCI, a Grinding Station, or instead of using a sacrifice outlet, you can also use Jaheira, because whenever you generate 2 clue tokens, you will instantly be able to tap those 2 clues, produce 2 green mana in the process. You can then use that mana to sacrifice one of those clues and get the Lonis triggers going. And once again, for this combo line, all the previous 16 cards that will win you the game with infinite clues entering and infinite counters do apply to this one. For the next combo line, you will need 4 cards. You will need a Lonis on the battlefield, either a KCI or a Jaheira on the battlefield, Clan Crafter, and one of the cards that will double our counter production or that will generate us additional artifact tokens. You start the loop by sacrificing a clue token to Clancrafter's ability. This will draw you a card and will put 2 +1/+1 counters onto Lonis, generating you 2 clue tokens, or with an artifact token doubler, it will generate you an additional artifact token in the form of either a food, treasure, or mutagen token. Either way, you will now have 2 artifact tokens to sacrifice. You can then sacrifice one of those artifact tokens to the KCI to produce you 2 colorless mana, which you can then use to activate Clancrafter's ability again and just keep the loop going. Or if you have Jaheira on the battlefield, you will be able to tap 2 artifact tokens and pay for the cost of Clancrafter's ability that way. And this loop will result once again in infinite counters on any of your creatures and infinite clue tokens entering the battlefield. And the cards in this deck you can use as the counter doublers are a Hardened Scales, a Loading Zone, Diozolid, Kami of Whispered Hopes, Lila Holographic Assistant, or a Wizard's Class. And the cards you can use in this deck to generate you additional artifact tokens are an Academy Manufacturer, a Peregrine Took, and a Donatello. And like with the previous combos, you can use any of the 16 win cons I already explained when I was going over the extruder loop. And we also run a couple of backup combo lines that don't directly rely on Lonis. The first one being Devoted Druid plus Machine God's Effigy, which is a 2-card combo that will generate you infinite green mana. You can just have the Druid on the battlefield, make the Machine God's Effigy enter as a copy, and since the Machine God's Effigy isn't actually a creature, you can put an infinite amount of -1/-1 counters on it, allowing you to just keep tapping it for mana, untapping it, and generating you an infinite amount of green mana in the process. We also have a combo with Basking Brutescale and Therian Soul Cleaver, because whenever you have the Soul Cleaver attached to the Brutescale, you can just sacrifice one of the spawn tokens, the Brutescale will get a new counter, and you will get a new Eldrazi spawn token, which will result in you getting an infinite amount of counters on the Basking Brutescale and an infinite amount of colorless mana. For the next combo, you will need a Vigian Graft Mage and either a Gyre Sage or a Kami of Whispered Hopes on the battlefield. Whenever these creatures can be tapped for a total of 3 mana, you can just use 2 of that mana to activate the Graft Mage's ability, untap him again, and you will always net at least 1 mana in the process, resulting with you ending up with an infinite amount of mana. For the next combo, you will need a Feta Mage on the battlefield, and then either a Wizard's Class at its max level or a Lila. Whenever you then draw a card, you will get to put a +1/+1 counter on the Feta Mage, which will draw you another card, and put another counter on the Feta Mage, essentially allowing you to draw your entire deck. And that's it for the combos in this Lonis deck. I'm almost at the end of recording this video and I can feel that I'm almost losing my voice. I'm sure there are many more combos or interactions in this deck that I didn't cover in this video or in the primer. If I did, I apologize in advance and please let me know in the comments below so I can add them to the Moxfield primer. And for the final part of this video, I also have a small little upgrade section if you want to push this Lonis deck even further. The easiest way to upgrade this deck is just starting with the mana base and including fetch, shock, bondlands, whatever. This will make the deck and your color fixing way more consistent. From there, you can decide to slot in some of the premium cards that I will cover, which will offer you way more efficient win cons and way more efficient ways to protect Lonis. At the end of the upgrade section, I will also flash into the screen what card swaps that you should actually make in the deck to include these upgrades. Birds of Paradise and Delighted Halfling. Like I mentioned in the main video, we do play 2 2-mana rocks, which honestly aren't the most efficient cards in the deck. Cards that allow us to accelerate our mana from as early as turn 1 will always be fantastic to have in our opening hand. And a Birds of Paradise and a Delighted Halfling are just exactly that, allowing us to go from 4 1-mana mana dorks to a total of 6 1-mana mana dorks, which will almost guarantee us that we have one of these 1-drop creatures in our opening hand. Urza's Saga, an enchantment land card that, as you could have guessed, works in exactly the same way as a Saga does. This land will enter the battlefield with 1 lore counter, allowing you to add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. On the second turn, it will get its 2nd lore counter and you can invest some mana into it to generate a construct token. But the main reason I'd include this card in the deck is whenever you get to its 3rd lore counter, which will allow you to tutor your deck for any artifact card with either mana cost 0 or 1. And you get to put that card straight onto the battlefield. And the amount of targets you have for this type of effect in this deck is just ridiculous. You can go get your Altar of the Brute as a win con, you can get your Therian Soul Cleaver to set up a combo line, or if you desperately need some acceleration, you can even use this effect to go fetch your Soul Ring. Urza Saga is a really expensive land, but for good reason. Benevolent Hydra. For 2 green mana plus X, you get a 1/1 creature that will enter the battlefield with X additional +1/+1 counters. And passively, he has exactly the same effect as a Hardened Scales. Whenever you put a counter on something, you get an additional counter. Now, just having an additional Hardened Scales effect in the deck for the low cost of 2 green mana is already really good in itself. But by tapping this creature and removing one of its counters, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control, which thanks to its passive ability will actually put 2 counters on that creature. A really good way to get some counters on either Lonis to generate some clue tokens or on any of your other creatures that will trigger in some way whenever you put counters on them. Heroic Intervention. Yeah, what should I say about this card? For 2 mana you get a spell that will protect every permanent you control by giving it hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Protection spells really don't get any more efficient than this one. Polywog Prodigy. For 2 mana you get a 1/3 body with Evolve. For as long as this creature is on the battlefield and one of your opponents decide to cast a non-creature spell with lesser mana value than Polywog Prodigy's power, we will get to draw a card. And as you can imagine, in this type of deck we will be able to stack a ton of counters on this creature, make it go to a really huge amount of power, and we will be drawing like 4 to 6 cards of him every single turn cycle because your opponents will always be casting non-creature spells. An auto-include card in any counter-based deck where you can actually grow this card's power. Fierce Guardianship. For 3 mana we get to counter any non-creature spell, but whenever we control our commander we can cast the spell without paying its mana cost. This entire deck revolves around us having Lonis on the battlefield, and having the ability to tap all of our mana and still have a protection spell available is just insane value. Like I mentioned in all my videos, all the cards that cost 0 mana whenever you control your commander are absolutely broken and should be banned in the format in my opinion. That being said, this card is just way too good not to include in the deck. Wave Goodbye. For 4 mana you get a sorcery spell that will bounce every creature without a +1/+1 counter on itself. Now especially if you are playing in some pots that are really creature and board reliant, this card might just save you the game. Because if an opponent is threatening lethal on board for you the next turn, you can just cast a spell, bounce every creature back, and you will be fine for another turn, giving you more time to go fetch up your combo pieces and win the game with an infinite combo. And the last card in the upgrade section is Urza Lord High Artificer. And yesterday we just got the news that Urza isn't a game changer anymore. Whenever this card enters the battlefield, we get to create a 0/0 artifact golem token that will get +1/+1 for every artifact we control. So whenever Urza enters, we will already get a chum blocker we can use to protect ourselves. And once you have a million clue tokens out, it will actually deal a ton of damage if your opponents aren't able to block it. Urza's second ability functions in the same way as a Jaheira. He allows us to tap any untapped artifact we control to add 1 blue mana to our mana pool. So instead of just using Jaheira to generate us a ton of mana by tapping our clue tokens, we can also use Urza for that. And for 5 generic mana, we can activate this ability to shuffle our library, exile the top card, and we can cast that card without paying its mana cost. Now this effect might seem really random for the cost of 5 mana, but since it will be so easy to generate infinite mana whenever you have an Urza on the battlefield, he actually also is an out that will translate into a win con. Because you can just activate this ability an infinite amount of times, get your entire deck onto the battlefield, and you will just win the game from there. If you want to include any of these upgrades into the deck, I will be flashing into the screen what cards you should replace with them. And that's it for my really in-depth Lonis deck tech. Believe it or not, I'm actually 4 hours deep into recording this video. All jokes aside, this might genuinely be one of the coolest decks I have ever done on the channel. A 100 euro build with over 400 different combo lines that can just go infinite in about any possible way. If you enjoy decks that really reward you for knowing every single card and interaction in your deck, you'll really love playing this one. Don't forget to to go over to the Moxfield deck list, click on the primer button and check out the really in-depth primer I wrote on the deck there. If for some reason any of the combos weren't clear in this video format, you can just read them at your own pace over there. If you made it all the way to the end, comment a DNA emoji so I know you watched the entire video. And if you really want to help me out and push out this video to as many Commander players as possible, hit the like button, hit subscribe, and share this video with all your friends and your entire family. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.